All right, good afternoon, everybody. It is 3:30 and I would like to both apologise for the delayed start and to declare today's Performance Audit and Risk Committee open and welcome everybody both in the chambers and online. So firstly, I'll just call for any apologies.
Through you, Mr. Chair, an apology from Councillor Tim Blackler.
Thank you. Could I have somebody move that we accept that? Moved by Councillor Hopkins, accepted by Mayor Kircher. And I'll also just ask now if we, sorry, all those in favour, aye? Against? It's carried, thank you. I'll also just ask now if there are any declarations of interest. And if there are none, we'll move on. Before we move on to agenda item 3, confirmation of previous minutes, I'd just like to propose that under public excluded today, the only item on the agenda are the public excluded minutes of the Performance Audit and Risk Committee held in 27 Feb. So does anybody have anything that they wish to speak to those minutes?
This is one item there, Mr. Chair.
Is it material enough that warrants going into public or excluded, or is it something that we can address outside of that?
Very well. They're both very minor typographical.
Okay, so thank you. So on that basis, I propose that we close those out separately to this, and I ask somebody move that we create item 3.2 under the public forum, which is acceptance of the publicly excluded minutes. Have a mover? Don't need to. There we go. I'll just rule that then. Thank you very much. On that basis, we'll now move on to agenda item 3.1, being the review of the previous public minutes. And I'll invite anybody to speak to it. Councillor Hopkins.
Mr. Chair, I move confirmation of the adoption of the minutes with 3 corrections. This is to the public section of the minutes. On page 8, the second to last line on the page, the words are added into the mix, comma, the floor in model would rely. So we need to add the word the floor in the model. On the next page, at the very top of that page, page 9, there's a the reference there is, it says that has not happened. That was not happening, but it had since been corrected. Oh, sorry, that's my mistake. Forget that one.
Okay.
On page 10, I think this is a question of meaning. So under the in the paragraph that starts, the typographical error was identified in the external borrowings table. The total should read 61,344, 350. It was acknowledged that it was nice to see council was earning more interest on what it is paying. Now, I think that has to mean more interest than what it is paying.
No. It was the fact that that financial revenue was greater than forecast, and that was greater than forecast because it was we were earning a higher interest rate on the funds that we had invested rather than earning a higher. We are not earning more for interest than we are paying in that sense.
Well, so the sentence doesn't make sense to me, and I don't think it would make sense to the man or woman on the Clapham omnibus. It might be that we're earning more interest than what we've invested, but not what we're paying.
I'd be happy to work with the councillor to get some acceptable wording. I know we're under pressure, so I believe I can sort that with him through you.
Okay, thank you. Are you comfortable with that, Councillor Hopkins?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Does anybody else have any other comments on the minutes? If not, moved by Mayor Kircher, seconded by. I've got a seconder? Okay. Yeah.
I'll second.
Seconded by you. All those in favour? All those in favour? Against? Thank you. That's carried. Did you have a specific comment? Yeah. So they will be addressed as part of part of their update. Sorry, I should have mentioned that. So yeah, there are several items, many of which several action points, many of which are going to be addressed in the report from Paul and Amanda. Okay, so moving forward to agenda item 4.1, and this is an update on the Treasury strategy for the FY 23-24 fourth quarter, and I will hand over to Ms. Nichols.
So I'll largely take the report as read, similar recommendations to carry on the same sort of Treasury strategy for the fourth quarter of the year, continue to monitor available cash and projected future cash requirements. It is a tough thing to do in the current environment, but we are continuing to carefully monitor that. Liaising with our GFA to ensure the funds are available, and working with our independent advisor Bangkok Treasury Services to ensure compliance with policy. And then as soon as we have funds, surplus funds, we're putting those where they can maximise returns. So I think that was one of the questions from one of the action points from last time. That just confirming that there is zero interest on the current account. So at the end of each night, we transfer any surplus funds over to the call account, which is on 2.75%. And our retentions bank account also earns 2.75%. So we are working with BNZ to see if there's another opportunity, another type of account that we could earn higher interest rate, but then still have the funds available as well. So that's in progress. In terms of the current financial situation, our borrowings and investments are largely the same as last time. Going forward, as I've touched on, we are closely monitoring the cash flows at the department level. It has been quite irregular compared to previous years. Our 20th of the month payment run just the other day was a lot lower than previous March. In terms of borrowing, that hasn't changed. We are due to refinance later in April, and at this stage we're looking to borrow an extra 10 million, which we have spoken about earlier. But that should see us through we expect that'll see us through to 30 June, and we should close with 71 million, so an extra 10 on the 61 that we're currently sitting on, versus the annual plan, which was budgeted to be 50 mil. So a lot of that is to do with the, as we've talked about in the past, the extra carryover in capital projects and project reclaim and things. There's a listing of projects that we've still got to spend before 30 June. What else? Also, I wanted to touch on, like this morning, we talked about the annual plan consultation document, and it outlines those 10-year figures. So graphs similar to that will come forward in the next quarterly financial reports. We'll do that on a quarterly basis and start to look at the 10-year projections a lot more now that the projects are a bit more concrete and approved by council. I think that's everything for the Treasury report. Any questions?
Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, one. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a very small matter, but on page 6 of that, we've got a list of a lot of the borrowing that we've recently undertaken through LGFA. And towards the bottom of that page, the fixed rate bills, the fourth from the bottom, that's the 15th of May, I think, 15th of May 2028. The interest rate there is 2.32%. Everything else, with the exception of a couple early on, are much, much higher. So is that an omen of things to come? Is that a recent borrowing? It sort of sticks out a bit simply by virtue of that not being the same as the others.
So these are in order of when they mature. So the 2028 ones would have been taken out most recently, the 15th of May 28. So they were the ones that we were refinanced recently.
So is that a good sign? Is that a good sign that interest rates are coming down again?
The last two, the over 5%.
No, but I think what Councillor
not
Hopkins is
necessarily-
asking is that there's an existing, and I suspect it's whilst it's got a maturity date of May 2028, it must have had a
took it out
start date a
earlier.
significant period of time ago. So just like with your mortgages, your fixed rate mortgages, you can take these out for 2, 3, 5, 10 years. This is one of the wonderful legacy ones that we took out earlier. So I just had a couple of other comments. I think as I noted to you and Paul earlier, I'd like to question the interest rates on both Observatory Charitable Trust for the last piece and also the Amarama Airfield, because I don't think those rates are correct.
Yep, so I can confirm those rates are correct.
They are
That's
correct.
Our new lending to those two organisations that were approved by council late last year. And it's the BNZ CAL rate plus one has a 3% margin and one is 2.5. So that's how we get the over
Oh,
10%.
okay, so we are getting over 10%
interest we're receiving.
for those two loans. Okay, thank you. And I was also just going to note on page 6, so the comment before around the $10 million and $11 million, we will be forecasting to end the year $21 million above what our original budgeted debt was.
Yes, I can confirm that we're now looking at, we're projecting around 71 million. It'll all depend on timing of capital projects and invoices coming in. Well, not necessarily coming in, but when the work's completed. So that's against the 50 mil original budget.
How does the spend on project reclaim feed into that? Because I note when we look at one of the letter reports that we're about 5 million under for that year to date. For the project reclaim, I think our actual project reclaim year to date was 1.9 and we budgeted on 7.2.
Yeah, so they haven't actually physically started moving the stuff, but I thought the budget was lower originally, the annual plan budget, and we pulled the budgets forward. The variance goes the other way, doesn't it?
Okay, we can talk to that when we move into the financial update in the next section, but it was just something that I picked up on that I'd quite like to follow through. Sorry, are there any other questions?
Well, if I could just add to that, I think it probably mostly is a timing thing. There's a lot of preparation work that's been going on at Palmerston landfill and preparing, but I don't think they've started moving the rubbish itself from those different sites, and that's going to be when the spending cranks up, I think. The other thing in question is really whether we've got to pay the waste levy, and I don't think we've had any confirmation of that yet. Still talking with MFE, Ministry for the Environment, around the need for that when we're taking stuff out of the ground and putting it back in the ground, and we'd rather spend it on looking after the environment rather than that. So we'll see how that discussion goes, but that could save $2 to $3 million, I believe.
That would be handy. Councillor McKone.
But given that we're looking at probably 80 million by the end of June, 71, sorry, is there a forecast for the end of June 2025? And second part of that is some of these big projects should be run out of then, and I think we agreed that we don't have carryovers anymore unless they're agreed to. I think that's been here somewhere, but in that respect, the likes of the landfills being moved early, does that upset our cash flows and our borrowing and everything else? So what I'm trying to say, these big projects, do we give it a fine date that works with our financing?
Yep, so that's something we're tightening up. So obviously your annual plan includes your 2025 budgets. So that's out, that was approved to go out for consultation this morning. So that includes the debt projections with a starting point of our new revised year-end one this year of 71. I can't remember offhand what it was. And in terms of project reclaim, so I think in the 2024 budget, there was a lower amount overall at 30 June, but then we're going to be doing more work in the 30 June this year than planned. But then in the February report, I think the timing's we're slightly behind because we thought we'd do more before February. And so in the later months, April, May, June, I think it's going to increase again to still reach where it was projected to be at June. So that's how we
Yeah,
get up to
but-
the 70 by June.
Yeah, and one of the actions that I requested in last month's PAR was that we started to get longer term projections of the debt profile going out based on our most recent updates. And to Amanda's point, that graph was put out in the draft consultation plan this morning and is going to be included in every quarterly update that we have going forward, so that we've got a really clear visual of what that kind of debt runway is forecast to look like. Yes.
So I noticed a comment on the bottom of page 11, delays in starting the event centre project has significantly impacted Parks and Recreation. Could that be expanded on a wee bit, please?
My apologies. Sorry, Councillor McCone, just on that one, that's actually part of agenda item 5.1, which is the financials update. So because of the way that things were bound, we'll come back to that. Any more questions on the Treasury report for either Amanda or Paul?
Mr. Chair, I'm happy to move the
Thank
recommendation.
you. Moved by Councillor Hopkins, second by Rebecca. All those in favour? Against? Thank you. That's carried. And we'll now move forward to agenda item 4.2, which is adoption of the revised procurement policy. A very topical subject. And Amanda.
Thank you.
Sorry, Amelia, my apologies.
It's quite all right. I was just waiting to see if the governance advisor had anything that she wanted to say there. So the revised procurement policy is brought to this committee for endorsement before it is hopefully adopted by council at a later meeting. There are some key changes to the policy. So the first one is that the professional services procurement between $50,000 and $200,000 has been changed slightly to align more with other types of procurement and just to allow for a quotation process to take place for procurement of professional services. Information services now need to be involved in any procurement of hardware or software. So whilst that was alluded to in the policy before, we've just made that a little bit more explicit. And the inclusion of broader outcomes as an attribute for assessment of bids or tenders is now mandatory. So that means that anyone planning procurement must consider whether broader outcomes, so those are things like local employment or environmental outcomes, should be considered as an attribute to be assessed as part of a quotation or tender procedure. In addition to that, there were some minor changes, so general tidying up. We've added some new diagrams and we've also removed reference to business cases because that will be included in the project management framework going forward.
Thank
Any
you.
questions?
And you've very helpfully put in here a marked up copy of all of the changes so that people can follow it through and review it if needed, which is really, really useful in terms of following. I just had one question at the start, but on page 16, the last bullet point from the bottom, you refer to the fact that references to business cases have been removed as this requirement will be covered in the new project management framework. And I was just wanting to understand how that project management framework was going to be taken for approval and where it was going to go to. So if we're taking something out of a framework that we approve here, is it going into something else that's approved somewhere else? And if so, do we need to be aware of it?
So I can't 100% confirm where that project management framework will go to for approval. It will at the very least go to ELT. It's currently in the works. It's a very comprehensive document, but whether it's too operational to come here, I'm not 100% sure.
That's absolutely fine. I'll open it up to any questions for Amelia. Councillor Cowles.
Thank you, through your chair. Got a few questions here and there, nothing major though. Just a quick question around the 1.5 being where it comes to council. Obviously historically and being a new council, how's that figure kind of set or come to? And I'm just, it's a thought of me at the moment. Well, times are a little bit tight. Should we be looking at something slightly lower? But that's just a thought. I've got three on this, so these are relating to page 8. So I'll do the 3 here. For council pre-procurement, we spoke earlier, should we have some insight perhaps over the tender documents? And I think Councillor Percival brought up earlier that maybe on the panels that there was an elected member or two on there, and I'm wondering, you know, if we talk about, say, Parks and Rec, maybe this is an ideal place for us to look at activating our portfolios. Myself being.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second here? Let's all please remember that the discussion that we've just come out of was public excluded.
Yep. Yep. My apologies. Well, I mean, I haven't said anything around it. I guess what I'm saying is, for certain areas, maybe this would be an ideal area for portfolio holders to be activated, was what my thought was. So I guess that's the first of those ones. I guess the only real question out of that is, you know, would that be helpful where portfolio members were brought in at some stage through some of these larger ones? I guess that's pretty much. The only other one is procurement of professional services. I'm just wondering what a description of perhaps what professional services are being included in there, because they could be very wide and varied around. I guess someone in their mind may limit that to quite a small area, or others might think that's quite a large sort of open book sort of description. So I guess that's the only other bit. Thank you.
So to address that a bit first, we do have a definition of professional services in the glossary at the very end of the policy. And obviously it doesn't include everything that could ever be a professional service, but it does say if anyone's confused or thinks that maybe something is or isn't, that they should contact me and we can discuss whether it would fall into that category. The $1.5 million comes from the financial delegations, which is separate to the procurement policy, and I'm unsure how often that is reviewed. I would assume every 3 years, but getting the nod to say yes, every 3 years. And in terms of portfolios and elected members being on evaluation panels for tenders, I don't think there's a precedent for that that's been set anywhere, and potentially it would be more of an observer role. But it's something that we could discuss as and when large contracts do come up.
Mr. Hope, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, and I think that, as we said, I think the time to consider that would be when the report in terms of the contract and the procurement plan is brought to council. I think, you know, we'll just be aware of that and add that as an eyes on that specific contract rather than trying to include it in the procurement policy. I think we're better doing it at the report writing stage.
Thank you.
Just one further follow-up from me before I go to Councillor Hopkins. We've talked about having broader outcomes as secondary benefits. Is there any recommendation in the policy about what weighting should be applied to those?
So there is more detail in the procedural documentation that sits beneath policy, and it obviously comes very much down to what the procurement is, and we can't cover every eventuality in the procedural documentation, but obviously for some procurements we will be looking for lowest price conforming, so we wouldn't include broader outcomes, and for some they would be very important. Generally speaking, you probably wouldn't see it at more than 20%. That would be quite a significant percentage attribute to give to that one.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, a few things. Some of them are pretty minor. Page 22 or page 4 of the amended policy, I think if you look at B under strategic alignment, the wording of that needs to be changed. Just doesn't make quite enough sense at the moment. The really big messages for me are on page 25 or page 7. It looks, I'm assuming that the value for money section is new or has been amended. And I'm rather concerned that we seem to be sort of talking ourselves out of trying to get the best deal possible price wise. And it talks about officers should achieve the right quality, quantity and price at the right time, place and time. Care should be taken to ensure that unreasonable risk is not assumed in pursuit of the lowest whole of life cost. Equally, I'd like to see care should be taken to ensure that unreasonable cost is not incurred in pursuit of a value for money approach. In the end, 13.9% rate rise is worse than 10%, 10.9% rate rise. So, I mean, prices and costs do matter. So I would like to see a bit more work put into wording of that. Equally, with regard to the next section on that same page, just talking about social value and local supply, when undertaking a tender process, it is mandatory to consider broader outcomes. I think we need to add the word such as weighted attribute criterion. But we then go on to say, while a small number of procurements may not benefit from broader outcomes being evaluated, the vast majority will be enhanced. The difficulty I have with that is the broader outcomes. I mean, the chair has asked about the weighting given to them. What I couldn't tell anyone who walked up to me today and asked is what the broader outcomes are. And I believe they should be quantified, and in other words, described. A couple of other very small things. On page 29, are we able to sort of tidy up the headings on the top of that chart where words get sort of turned into, you have procure men and then DS in the next line? And finally, on page 34 or page 16 of the document, there's only one reference under IT software and hardware. For the first and only time in the whole document, we say you must involve information services. And I think that shouldn't be there. I think it's necessary or information services should be involved or something like. I mean, we haven't personalised it like that anywhere else in the document, so I just don't think it should be there. But the changes on page 25 are the ones that I think are the significant ones.
So just, I picked up on the use of first person there as well,
Yeah.
Councillor Hopkins. So I think that's a really, really minor change.
Yeah.
If I could just speak briefly before I hand back to Amelia around the broader benefits. I think, Amelia, they have purposefully been put in here as broadly as possible because, to the point that you raised before, they could be quite different in different situations. What this is trying to capture, well, it could be. It depends on the contract that you're tendering. It depends on the type of service that you're tendering. You can't be quite so prescriptive because it's such a broad-reaching document. But I'll hand back to you to speak more to that.
Yes, absolutely. We've obviously in this policy, we're trying to cover everything from engaging a solicitor through to digging up a landfill and moving it to another landfill and the lizards you may encounter along the way. So there are many possible things that council will be procuring, and we can't necessarily cover all the eventualities in here. But part of the procedural documentation is making people think about what they want to achieve and not just the outputs of the procurement, but the outcomes as well, and whether those are to do with improving the district, whether that's through more people being employed, skills being shared across the district, or the environment being improved. All those things need to be considered based upon what we are trying to procure. In terms of the value for money section, that hasn't been changed. I think it's just a font change that has highlighted that as a track change. So it does remain the same. But what we're trying to get at there is that there obviously is a false economy, that if you buy the cheapest thing, that sometimes you might have to buy that thing 3 times instead of just investing a little more the first time and getting a quality product. And for things like water infrastructure or roading, we want to make sure that we do invest a little bit more to make those things last rather than having to just repeat the process. In terms of the headers on the tables, I think again that's just to do with the track changes, so that will all be tidied up when those are all accepted, and I'll make sure that everything aligns. I don't know whether there was Anything else that I've missed?
The last one was just the specific reference to you under the IT
Oh,
services.
yes.
that we can touch
So,
on.
yeah, I will go back
It's
through and
a-
change
it's a
that. I
bit
think that's
minor.
because I worked with the IS team on that wording, so potentially that's where that's
It's a minor
fallen
grammatical.
through the cracks.
Future.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly support making sure that IS are involved in decision makings on software. We've had too many circumstances where strange software enters our system and doesn't become compatible with everything else. So that's really good to see. I just want to talk on the local supply aspect, sustainability, social values, and local supply. I think you know, to be very specific, whilst keeping it broad, I think we do need to look at on, you know, in broadening that out to actually also include the fact that we do receive dividends from one of our local contractors, and that is something that should be taken into account, I believe, where it's relevant on those tenders. That's relevant because it does come down to if we get a part of the profit back. That's just as important to us as if that company is out doing free traffic management for an event, or you know, if any company is doing those sorts of things, so that they are doing community things, it's another measure that we should be very deliberately including and transparently including. So make that suggestion, because all of those sorts of things do add up, and if ultimately we're going to get, you know, we can expect to get 5% of the cost back as a dividend, then we should say that and be open about it, because we know there are companies whose profits or dividends go elsewhere, and we don't get the benefit of that. So it is a very clear benefit. Thank you.
The only difficulty with that, and correct me if I'm wrong, would be that the dividends would be based upon the annual profit as a whole rather than that contract itself. So we wouldn't be able to predict how that contract would impact those dividends in isolation. So it would be quite a difficult thing to do.
I don't.
I've already got that solution.
Yeah, I don't think the mayor is that we have some sort of firm calculation, but the consideration that we could receive dividends off the back of this is something that we can add to the broader mix.
I think, you know, it could be written in that we look at the past 3 years of performance, the revenue versus the dividend that council gets, and that could be an assumption that we make. So just to put a hard figure on it and make sure that we're not being too subjective in whatever the calculation, that we've got an objective measure to use. Just as an idea.
Thank you. Councillor McCone.
Yeah, look, I struggle with a lot of this. I understand why it's got to be there in the procurement policy, but you know, we're talking some pretty big numbers, and as an elected representative from the Corridor Ward, I'm responsible for the spending of that ratepayers' money. Now, what worries me is yes, we're changing a few things around, but could someone explain where the accountability and the business plan and the paper trailers? You know, it says they have the ability to borrow between 50 and will spend between 50 and 200,000, and then once that's gone further, 200,000 to 1.5 million. Where is the backup? Because people I represent are going to ask me some questions, and I wouldn't know why.
So procurement plans are required for anything over $200,000, and for anything that's a non-standard procurement. So if you were spending 150,000 and you weren't going to get 3 quotes, you would need a procurement plan for that as well. Other than that, you would see an audit trail for anything that is standard below 200,000 in terms of who had been appointed the work via what method and who had approved it. So there's an initial, obviously, budget approval process, then there's a procurement approval process, and then there's a contract award. So there's the 3 steps there that are required through the financial delegations.
There's also reporting that comes to the PAR on a quarterly basis on wherever there's been any non-standard approvals and where they've come from, so that we can help identify if we see patterns going on that we're not comfortable with, that we want to understand further and look to. to resolve, and there's some of those come through today.
Possibly along those lines. Yeah, we need to be mindful that, there are situations where, a tin of price ends up being more, and, some circumstances it may be that, there's a price escalation during the project, and we allow up to 20%, before it comes back to council, unless it actually goes over the threshold that has been set. So, $1.4 million project, if it comes in at 1.49, that's fine. But if it comes in at 1.51, then it comes to us. I don't think there's any easy way around that, but I do, when there's ability for a 20% adjustment, to not come to us, it is quite a reasonable amount. And so, it's a concern at times, and if we budget that something's going to be $1 million and it comes in at 1.2, that can be signed off at staff level. So it's making sure that we're comfortable with whatever level is there.
So we could ask, as part of the procurement update, that we also have brought to this forum any cost overruns at a minimum dollar value. I think a minimum dollar value would be more appropriate than a percentage value, because 10% of $1,000 doesn't matter, but 10% of $100,000 might.
Thank you for staff to look at that situation and come back with a recommendation on that.
And is there a recommended materiality value that we think should come to here? Is it $50,000, $100,000? Okay, we'll take it away and look at it. Anybody else got any questions? Councillor Cowles.
Thank you. Page 16, approaching the market and open advertising. I see that you do a lot of stuff through GETS, and I understand it's a standard platform. Do we also have a page on our council website where our tenders are up there for people to view openly as well? I'm just, because it's probably lead into a second question around encouraging local business and local people to be able to find these things easily and be able to also participate, or new contractors.
We don't actually have that set up at the moment. There is a requirement to publish what contracts we have awarded in the past for any Waka Kotahi funded procurements. So those are published on our webpage. It's something we could look at doing. It'd just be a matter of getting that process right and deciding which, or if all, need to go on the public website.
Thank you. Yeah.
And any further?
Well, yeah, and supplementary to that, I notice on page 20, it's stating that where total spend does not exceed $50,000 of variance of bids, less than or greater than 5% preference given to local suppliers. I'm just wondering why it's only at that $50,000 level, why we aren't looking at applying this to encourage, again, local contractors and local businesses to have some weighting, and what that weighting might look like across the board for our contracts, with an obvious benefit to growing our economy locally.
We've kept that at a fairly low level just for ease, so that's a really easy thing that people can put into practice when they've got something that's either $50,000 or lower. As we go up in price, you'd expect that people would have a slightly more complex way of assessing bids or quotations anyway. And also to make sure that we are still getting competitive bids, because if people get wind of the fact that maybe one person's always going to win because we've built into our policy that up to a certain amount of money, by default they probably will, we will stop getting people bidding for our work, and we will end up monopolising the market.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? I'm conscious of time. Councillor.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you'd let me move the recommendation that the Performance Audit and Risk Committee recommends council adopts a revised procurement policy with amendments as agreed.
I would love you to move that. Do I have somebody to second it? Rebecca, thank you. All those in favour? Sorry, just, Rebecca was the seconder. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? That's an against. So we'll note that, please.
It hasn't asked. Should. Okay.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on now to agenda item 5.1, which I think fortuitously is still yours, Amelia. So we're looking now at a procurement update.
Very topical. So this is the procurement update for the quarter. We've got the procurement overview in there, which gives you the value of contracts awarded in December, January and February. So that was a total of $714,045.97. So a little bit lower than the last couple of quarters, probably due to timing and just generally what contracts were required in the time period. Details of those can be found in the attachments. In terms of ongoing procurement activity, we are working through a new process with Bracken's Office Products Depot to improve the way we purchase office supplies. So that's going to be streamlined, and we'll be purchasing online with new prices for our most purchased products. We have, as of last week, joined the all of government contract for external legal services, which will save us a significant amount on engaging external legal counsel. Over the last quarter, we've required everyone to start logging their over $10,000 contracts in a contracts register. So that started at the end of January, and it's going well so far. The procurement policy has obviously been brought to this committee for review. And in January, we held a procurement community of practice meeting to get together people from across council who undertake procurement to discuss external changes, internal changes, and generally any hot topics that would be useful for people to share. Any questions on that?
Thank you. So I guess the ones that stand out for me here on page 50 of the report are with roading and waters. There seems to be either for roading, for example, of the 6 contracts awarded, 4 of them were non-standard versus only 2 that were standard. And for waters, it was a 4-3 split. So does that give you any cause for concern that more roading contracts tend to be awarded in a non-standard way than a standard way?
No, so I don't think that's a theme that's been noted over the last few quarters. So I think this quarter is a bit of an anomaly there. I think this was just to do with the work that was required. Some of that work was urgent, so they needed to directly appoint the people who could do it in the time that it was required. And some of that was purely, it was the only people that could provide certain things. So for example, waters, there's a limited pool of suppliers who can provide certain equipment or certain pieces of plant. Don't know really the technical terms for it, but things that do very important things at water treatment plants.
That's fine.
Very small pool of suppliers.
Just checking whether there were any anomalies that you weren't comfortable with as procurement advisor. And I think also some of the departments or some of the definitions are interesting as well. So for example, one of those non-standard roading contracts was the installation and removal of the Christmas decorations and lights.
Yes. It seems like roading held the budget for that.
It's absolutely
why
fine, but I was just
there.
looking at it. Councillor McCone.
I'm starting to sound like a Grinch, but I've got 2 or 3 questions there. Civil drainage, that's the 3rd one down. 20 grand to go across, replace a water main across 2 private properties and relocate on the road reserve. That seems a wee bit excessive. And then we go a bit further down there. K South landscaping service for the Marama water treatment plant, 28,500. That's up there. And there's another one with waters. Well, that'll do for starters anyway. But I think some of this is getting a wee bit out of hand.
Yeah. Noted. Mayor Kircher.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to make a judgment on what's included and what's not, but as we look at the overall policy and strategy that we have, and like it's great that K South got the work, they're a great company, they're a local one here in Oamaru, but they're as we look at local, whether we are making sure that local means you know, the closest part of that community, of the Waitaki community as well. So if there is someone in the Marama, for example, that can do the work, whether they get the opportunity to price for it as well, because they won't have the travel time and so on. So not wanting to call out, you know, any particular thing, but it's just an example, I think, of making sure that local is as local as we can, because we want to encourage our small communities and the businesses within them.
All right, thank you. One last question, councillor Percival.
Yeah, on page 51, there's an example of a procurement activity regarding Brackens, who supply our office products and stuff. And then a comparison with them with all of government to supply. I'm interested to know, were other possible suppliers and were inquiries made with other suppliers regarding our contract, and also, yeah, and why did Brackens all of a sudden revise their pricing? What kind of incentive was given, or what information given them to do that? Because I'm looking at this as an example of all our procurement, because as well known around here, I'm not comfortable with the delegation given to officers in far as spending goes. But this is an example to me of why, how, and who, and we, and we have a proposal. The decision was made by whom? I guess that's the ELT. I can't remember, but I believe this contract is worth between 100 and 200,000 a year. I'm not sure, it's just off the top of my head from memory. It just all seems a wee bit to me. You know, Brackens did it. We told Brackens to get their act together, and they went and made another revised price. But where were all the other? There's 100 different people.
Okay. Is this a question that can get this? Is this a question that can be answered quickly, or is this a question that would be more efficiently answered by reverting back through an email?
Probably I'd answer in an email. That's okay.
I've asked that your question be answered outside of here, but through an email that can be passed around all of the members.
Well, okay, fine. That's fine. I'm
conscious of the time, and I'm
example.
conscious of the time, and I'm conscious of another few things that we need to get through. And I don't think that answering that question right now is the most efficient use of the remaining time that we have in the park. It will be addressed, and everybody will get an answer.
Could we also get an email answer to why the economic development budget paid for the staging and lighting event at the new?
That's because the events budget is now sitting under the CEO office as part of the ED. But hopefully the event stuff itself won't be done then. We'll see how we go.
Are you sure?
Could we also get an explanation, please, why there was $34,000 spent on the translocation of skinks from the Hampton closed landfill? No.
I'll include that in the email.
All right. Can we please have somebody move that we receive the report? Deputy Mayor Halali, can I have someone second it? Councillor Hopkins. Thank you. All those in favour? Against? Thank you. That's carried. If we now move forward, and again, you still have the microphone, Amelia, and we talk very quickly to the risk update.
I'll try to be very quick with this one. So the risk update is included in these papers. We, again, this quarter have seen an increase in the number of very high risks on the register, and that was through the addition of a risk relating to externally managed council water supplies. The other very high risks are political uncertainty, Three Waters transition, climate change, credit risk failure by a borrowing entity and district development. Climate change has remained very high since its addition to the register, and credit risk failure and district development have both been rated very high for 3 consecutive quarters. Three Waters Transition has a rating of very high as of last quarter, and as we're all aware, there's uncertainty around that and increased regulatory compliance, which can imagine that risk is going to reduce anytime soon. The long-term plan risk, however, did reduce from very high to high this quarter because we have deferred that for a year. The new addition to the register relating to externally managed council water supplies, at the time we included that in the register, no controls were in place and they were all to be implemented. Work has been undertaken and there is a memorandum of understanding in the works and meetings have been set up, so progress is being made there. Any questions?
Councillor Hopkins.
Just one very quickly, I know you've added the risk of non-alignment with central government as a major thing, and I think you're right about that being a risk. But my question is, on page 63 of the document, we have the serious harm incident, and you've elevated that to high. That's a risk of serious injury or fatality. My question is why? Because I mean, the health and safety reports we're getting are that generally speaking, accidents and the like are on the decrease, not the increase.
So that one did only increase, it was high previously. It did increase from a high of 12 to a high of 16, so it was only a minor change. But that was in discussion around the fact that we have pools that we're aware that people, obviously, there are fatalities that can happen there. Water treatment plants, which again can be quite dangerous, and unfenced bodies of water in the region. So we don't necessarily think this is a worsening risk, but we think perhaps we'd not quite got it rated correctly before.
Thank you. So it's not a case that the risks got greater. It's the fact that we might have undershot what we thought it was, and it was high and it remains as high. Mayor Kircher?
Yeah, just on that type of thing, is our station included in our risk register? That's good, thank you.
Councillor McKay?
Yeah, it's page 53, I think it is. 60, sorry. Second line down, the risk of the judgment is made against the council with final code of compliance. Now, is that actually a risk? Because that's part of our job, is ticking that box to make sure everything's done right. And, as a side to that, I noticed back in that form of graphs of payments made, there was 13,500 spent to the Simpson and Grierson by that regulatory team on legal advice. So are we double dipping? Do we need to actually include that in that system?
So that risk relates to joint and several liability, whereby if we were the last man standing, we would be liable for the costs involved with whatever work needed to be undertaken to correct any issues with code of compliance. So this has happened to other councils, and we're not immune to it, as there are elements of human error, but that's not necessarily what this is based upon. It's mainly based upon the fact that we can only see what we can see, and if a contractor puts metal in the ground ready to pour concrete and we say, yeah, pour your concrete, and then they take that metal out, we couldn't have done anything about it, but we could still end up being liable under joint and several liability.
Mr. Hope?
Yes, and I think we specifically reconsidered this risk because of another decision from the court, basically reinforcing the liabilities that council has and potentially even expanding it. So
In that example, with sort of the building consents issue there. We've seen another council. Okay.
Mr. Chair, I'm happy to move the recommendation on page.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Hopkins. Do I have a seconder? Deputy Mayor Halale, all those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you very much. We'll move now on to the last item on the agenda. Agenda item 5.3, financial summary. And I'll hand over to Amanda to please speak to this.
Okay, so this is the financial update for the 8 months to 29 February. A full quarterly update will come next month. And so I'll be able to give you a lot more breakdowns then. So this is a bit of a high level summary. There has been no significant changes to the variances reported last time, with the major variances being a decrease in income expected because we haven't begun the sports and events, we haven't got the funding for that as expected. And also because our depreciation, revaluation was higher at 30 June 23 than we anticipated. The depreciation for the year is also higher than we expected. So other expenses are still cruising along higher because I've looked into, tried to get more detailed explanation, and it's kind of across the board. That's not in any particular area or any particular department. It's just a general inflationary increase. But the quarterly report that I bring back next month, I'm going to give more detailed breakdown and more department analysis and lower level explanations there. We touched on Project Reclaim before, so I just wanted to just wanted to say, so for February we budgeted to have spent 7 mil, but we've only spent the 1.9, but we still expect to spend that 7 mil over the next few months. So it's just a timing difference. We haven't done it yet. And then in terms of CapEx, same sort of story as last time. Waters is a bit higher, offset by roadings a little bit lower. So it's just kind of timing differences of when they've got tenders and everything. And obviously the Sports and Event Centre hasn't happened as planned this financial year.
Thank you very much for that. I know that you had a question, Councillor McCullough, you want to bring up again. I had one question down there. Sorry, just firstly a point. I think we'd all really appreciate that breakdown of other expenses in the next quarterly report, because it was something that we spoke to last time. And I think everybody, I don't think anybody's satisfied with general inflationary measures as being the explanation for that almost $1.3 million increase across there. My second point was just the last bullet point on what is page 10 of the report, where we talk about financial revenue significantly over budget, significant as a percentage, but only 300,000 in terms of real dollars. But my second question was more around, while finance cost is extremely close to budget for the period, despite increased borrowing from LGFA, I just wondered how that could, if we borrowed significantly more than we had intended to, and interest rates are going up. I'm just wondering why the cost is close to, how the cost can be close to budget. So thank you. And Councillor McCone, you had a question from earlier.
Yeah, look, I'm just wondering what the hold up in the event centre is. You know, when was the budget to start? And if so, why is it showing up now if it hasn't started?
So Mayor Kirch has left briefly, but Mr. Hope, do you feel well versed enough to speak to that?
I mean, yeah, just saying it's a timing issue, yeah, it's always a bit weak, but I think it really is. There's securing the funding and making funding decisions to take a bit longer, and therefore that has pushed out all of the decision-making frameworks. But I believe currently the program is on it's in accordance with the timetable that was agreed when council made the final decision in terms of go or no go. So it was really because, you know, we set the budget. Yeah, this budget was really set, you know, over 12 months ago, and the estimates of the timing they've just moved since then.
Yeah, I guess the question is the timing going to keep moving? And if so, you know, what happens with these big numbers which have got anticipated receipts?
No, the timing, it's now on course. I mean, basically, we revised the timing once the final decision was made. And so that is now on course and will reflect that. We can give an update on that. Sorry, it's been a long day. So yeah, we'll give an update on the project, including the budget, the projected timing, and the revenue streams as soon as we can.
Thank you. I appreciate where your concerns coming from when you look at the second to last bullet point under the projections piece where it talks about the receipt of the funds is tied to the construction program. If these are not received, council's annual financial result will be adversely affected. So it's obviously dear to the heart of our financial result. Sorry. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'd like to suggest to our finance team that we have a close look at the devaluation amount, the depreciation amount over budget by 759. I really think we need to have a hard look at see if there's any of that we might wish to unfund or modify in any way. But the other question I have in relation to the information on the next page, some of these numbers just don't make sense to me. If I look at expenditure for the sake of argument, contractors, parks and recreation, we're supposed to spend 2,137,000. We actually spent 2,607,000. And yet if you go down to CapEx for parks and recreation, the budget was 4,285,000 and the actual spend was 814,000. So I'm thinking, how come we're actually over budget for the contractors in parks and rec, and yet so massively under budget for the capital expenditure that might be the sort of thing we would expect contractors to be doing?
I'll hand back to one of you to answer, but I don't know the two are intrinsically related.
No, they're not. Sorry, I mean, with an item on the council agenda, even though it wasn't public excluded, was the parks contractor. So that's the maintenance contractor who is very distinctly different from the biggest item in the park space is the event centre. So, virtually all of that cost that was supposed to be in the budget was going back to the earlier question.
I think we've answered that. Any further questions? If not, could I please ask somebody move that we accept this? Moved by Deputy Mayor Halale, seconded by Councillor Ryan. Thank you very much. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Given that we made the call to move the public excluded minutes into the main body of the item, we don't need to go through agenda items 6, 7 or 8. There is nothing to release under 9. And so with that, I declare the meeting closed at 4:32. And thank everybody who is both online and in the chambers for their attendance.